Before we begin, welcome to this channel, a place where stories of family sacrifice and truth come alive. If you believe, like I do, that real stories have the power to change hearts, then stay with me. And if you'd like to hear more of these journeys, you can always subscribe that way. You'll never miss the next chapter. Now, let me tell you about the night I gave everything away. I signed away the company I built for 20 years just so my son wouldn't lose his house. My name is Max. For 2 decades, I poured every drop of sweat and every restless night into building a small company from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous. I didn't wear expensive suits or drive shiny cars. But that business was my pride, my proof that even an ordinary man could create something lasting with his own 2 hands. But family has a way of testing what you're truly willing to sacrifice. My son Daniel called me one cold November morning. His voice cracked before he even spoke the words. He and his wife had fallen deep into debt. The mortgage was overdue. The bank was circling, ready to take their home. His children, my grandchildren, risked losing the only place they had ever known. I could hear the panic in his silence. A man drowning too proud to ask for A. And in that moment, I didn't think about the years I'd spent B. So he cried when he took the check. He hugged me with the kind of grip you don't forget. Dad in that moment. But what I didn't know was that gratitude fades quickly and sacrifice, when forgotten, can cut deeper. When I walked out of that lawyer's office, contract in hand, the November air felt heavier than usual. The ink was still drying on the papers that stripped me of everything I had built. My company was no longer mine. The trucks that bore my name, the warehouse that had smelled of sweat and sawdust, even the worn-out office chair where I'd fallen asleep 100 times, all of it belonged to someone else now. I should have felt empty. Instead, I told myself I had done the right thing. A father doesn't count the cost when his children are drowning. He just jumps in, even if he sinks in the process. Daniel met me in the driveway of his home later that evening. His face was flushed with relief, his arms wrapped tight around me like when he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. Dad, we're safe. You saved us. For a moment, those words warmed me. His kids ran out onto the porch, little Emma with her messy hair, and Tommy clutching his toy truck, and they clung to my legs, not knowing what had just happened, only sensing that their world was steady again. But behind them in the doorway stood Melissa, Daniel's wife. Her smile was thin, practiced, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. She thanked me, but her voice carried no weight. To her, I wasn't a savior. I was a man who had meddled, a reminder of their weakness. Over the next few weeks, the mortgage was caught up, the creditors stopped calling, and the storm that had threatened to sweep their lives away began to settle. I should have felt peace. Yet every time I visited, Melissa's eyes seemed colder. She began to answer the door a little slower, her words a little sharper, as though my presence reminded her of a debt she wished would vanish. Daniel tried to bridge the gap, inviting me over for dinner, insisting I was part of everything. But at the table, Melissa would sit with her arms folded, glancing at me only when she had to. One night, after Emma showed me the drawing she made of our family, Melissa snatched it off the fridge when she thought I wasn't looking. She stuffed it into a drawer, muttering something about too much confusion for the kids. That was when I realized the company wasn't the only thing I had given up. By saving my son's home, I had unknowingly sold a piece of myself, and in Melissa's eyes, I was worth less than the ink on that contract. At first, I tried to ignore the shift. Families go through seasons, I told myself. Gratitude takes time to grow, and maybe Melissa just needed space to adjust. Daniel called me often in those days, his voice lighter than it had been in months. The weight of foreclosure no longer pressed on his chest, and he started talking about new plans for the house, fresh paint for the kitchen, even a swing set for the kids. I listened, happy just to hear hope return to him, that I thought was worth every sacrifice. But inside their home, a different story was unfolding. One Saturday evening, Daniel invited me to stay for dinner. I arrived early, as I always did, bringing Emma her favorite cookies from the old bakery downtown. She ran into my arms, giggling, her small hands sticky with sugar as she hugged me. Tommy tugged at my sleeve, begging me to play with his trucks. The living room was alive with laughter until Melissa walked in. She glanced at the crumbs on Emma's face, the toy trucks scattered across the carpet, and then at me. Her smile was tight brittle. Max, you really shouldn't bring them sweets so close to dinner, she said, gathering the cookies and setting them high on a shelf. I laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. That's the privilege of being a grandpa, spoiling them a little. Her eyes narrowed just enough for me to notice. Well, we're trying to teach them discipline. They don't need mixed messages. The room went quiet for a moment. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly torn before changing the subject. Later that night, as we ate, Melissa mentioned the company. So you're officially retired now? Huh? Her tone carried no admiration, only a subtle jab. Yes, I replied calmly. I figured keeping this family together was more important than holding on to a business. She stabbed her fork into her salad. I suppose some people don't know when to let go of things. I caught Daniel's eyes across the table, tired, pleading eyes. He wanted me not to respond, not to make this worse. So I swallowed my pride, even as the bitterness burned in my throat. After dinner, while the kids were getting ready for bed, I overheard Melissa in the kitchen, her voice hushed, but Sharp, he can't just keep coming here like he owns the place. This is our home, Daniel. He sold his company, that was his choice. Don't let him think it gives him control over us. I stood in the hallway, unseen, every word striking deeper than the last. In her eyes, my sacrifice wasn't love. It was intrusion. And for the first time, I wondered if I had saved my son's house only to lose my place in it. The next gathering was meant to be a celebration. Daniel had managed to secure a small promotion at work, and Melissa insisted on hosting a dinner for a few friends and relatives. I arrived with a bottle of wine, the same kind Daniel and I used to share on quiet evenings when he was younger, talking about dreams that seemed too far to reach. I thought it would be a gesture of pride, a way of showing I still believed in him. The house smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, laughter spilling out from the living room as neighbors mingled. But when I walked in, Melissa's eyes landed on the bottle in my hands. Oh, we already have wine, she said, taking it quickly, almost snatching it. She set it aside on a counter, away from the others, as if embarrassed by it. I brushed it off, forcing a smile. It's just something I thought Daniel would enjoy. At the table, the conversation flowed easily at first. Stories of work, the children's antics, holiday plans. I listened more than I spoke, content just to be included. But as the night went on, the subtle jabs began again. Melissa laughed as one of her friends complimented the house. Well, it almost wasn't ours anymore. We had a little scare with the bank, but thankfully we pulled through. Her friend raised her brows. Oh, how did you manage that? Before I could say a word, Melissa leaned forward, her voice sweet as sugar but sharp as glass. Let's just say sacrifices were made. And sometimes people cling to past glories to feel important. The table chuckled politely, but I felt the sting in my chest. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, staring at his plate, saying nothing. One of the guests turned to me. Max, what did you used to do before retiring? I smiled faintly. I ran a small company. Built it from the ground up, actually. Melissa's laugh cut in before I could continue. Oh, yes. His company. He sold it, though. So I guess you could say he's adjusting. The words hung heavy in the air. My fork paused, mid-air, the roast chicken suddenly tasteless on my tongue. Around the table, people exchanged awkward glances. I wanted to tell them the truth, that the only reason this dinner was happening under this roof was because I had given up the very company she mocked, that the foundation of their security was paid for with my sacrifice. But I stayed silent, not because I was ashamed, but because I saw the way Daniel avoided my eyes. He wasn't ready to defend me, and in that silence I realized something: gratitude wasn't slipping away by accident. It was being pushed, buried, erased. That night, as I walked out to my car, under the cool autumn sky, the sound of laughter still spilling from the house, I wondered how long a man could stay quiet before the truth demanded to be spoken. The days grew shorter as winter crept in, and with each visit to Daniel's home, I felt the warmth slipping further away. What used to be an open door now carried hesitation. Melissa would greet me with a smile that never touched her eyes, the kind of smile people use when they're entertaining a guest they didn't invite. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by with a bag of groceries, fresh bread, some vegetables, and a pie Emma had once told me she loved. I thought it would be a small way to help to still be useful. But when I set the bag on the counter, Melissa's face tightened. You don't have to bring things, she said sharply. We can manage on our own. I know, I replied softly. I just thought the kids might like it. Her eyes flicked toward the pie. They don't need to depend on treats to be happy. We're trying to raise them differently. The words stung not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, as if my presence, my gestures were a burden. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, the distance grew even clearer. I tried to share a story about the early days of my company when Daniel used to help me sweep the shop floor after school. His little hands could barely hold the broom, but he insisted on being part of it. Daniel smiled faintly at the memory, but before he could respond, Melissa interrupted. Well, that's all in the past now. We should focus on what we're building for our children, not keep reliving someone else's story. Her words silenced the table. Emma looked at me, confused, her fork frozen in midair. Tommy stared down at his plate, not understanding but sensing the tension. Daniel tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. The air felt heavy, thick with things unsaid. After dinner, I offered to help clean up, but Melissa waved me off. No, thank you. We've got it. She said, we, in a way that excluded me completely. I stood in the living room, listening to the clatter of dishes, the muffled voices in the kitchen. My grandson tugged at my sleeve, whispering, Grandpa, why don't you stay over more? I knelt beside him, forcing a smile. Because sometimes grown-ups forget how much they need each other, Tommy. In that moment, I realized Melissa wasn't just uncomfortable with me being around. She was actively building walls, pushing me further out. And Daniel, torn between us, was letting those walls rise. I had given away my life's work to save theirs. Yet here I was, slowly being erased from the very home I had fought to protect. It happened on an ordinary Thursday evening. Daniel had asked me to stop by and watch the kids for a few hours while he worked late. I didn't hesitate. Being with Emma and Tommy was the one place I still felt whole. We played board games in the living room, laughter filling the air. Emma insisted I read her favorite book, the same one I had once read to Daniel when he was her age. She curled against my shoulder, her small hand holding mine as I turned the pages. That was the scene Melissa walked into when she came home. She dropped her purse on the counter, the thud sharper than usual. Her eyes lingered on Emma, tucked into my side, and something in her face hardened. Max, she said, her voice clipped. I thought you were just here to watch them, not to replace us. I blinked, caught off guard. Melissa, I was only reading her a story. She asked, you always have a reason, she cut me off. Cookies, stories, gifts. Do you even realize what you're doing? You're undermining us. Making the kids think you're the one they can depend on. The room went silent. Emma's eyes widened. Tommy clutched his toy truck tighter. I lowered my voice, careful not to let it shake. I'm their grandfather. Loving them isn't undermining anyone. Melissa's laugh was sharp, bitter. Grandfather, you mean the man who sold his company and now lingers around here like a reminder of failure? You think sacrificing your business gives you the right to plant yourself in this house? Her words cut deeper than she knew. Or maybe she knew exactly where to aim. Before I could respond, Daniel walked in weary from work, his briefcase still in his hand. He froze, sensing the storm. What's going on? He asked. Melissa turned to him, her tone immediately softer. Daniel, I just came home to find your father overstepping again. Daniel looked at me, his eyes tired, pleading for calm. For peace. Dad, maybe it's best if you give us some space tonight, he said quietly. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The kids stared at me, confusion etched on their faces. I rose slowly, every movement heavier than the last. Of course, I whispered, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. I kissed Emma's forehead, ruffled Tommy's hair, and walked toward the door. My coat felt heavier than ever as I slipped it on. Behind me, Melissa's voice carried low, satisfied, though she thought I couldn't hear. See, this is what I mean, Daniel. He doesn't belong here anymore. I stepped into the night, the cold air biting at my face. For the first time, I felt not just unwanted, but exiled from the very family I had fought to keep standing. And deep inside, something stirred. A realization. A quiet fire. If I didn't stand for myself soon, there might be nothing left of me in their lives at all. That night, I drove home with the radio off the silence, pressing harder than the winter wind against my windshield. Melissa's words replayed in my head like a cruel refrain: he doesn't belong here anymore. For hours, I sat at the kitchen table in my small house, staring at the empty coffee cup in front of me. My hands, rough and scarred from decades of work, rested flat on the wood. Those hands had built something from nothing: a business, a livelihood, a sense of dignity. And yet, with one signature, I had given it away. I told myself it was worth it, that family was worth any price. But lately I wondered, had I mistaken sacrifice for weakness? I remembered Daniel as a boy running through the shop, asking questions about everything. He used to look at me with wide eyes filled with admiration. One day, Dad, he'd say, "I'm going to build something just like you." Now that same son couldn't look me in the eye when Melissa pushed me out the door. I wanted to be angry with him, to rage at his silence, his cowardice. But anger never came. Instead, there was only this ache, this heavy sorrow that pressed down like a weight I couldn't shake. Because I knew why he stayed quiet. He was trying to hold his marriage together, to protect his children from conflict. And maybe in his own way, he thought silence was protection. But silence can also be betrayal. The next morning, Emma called me from her mother's phone, her voice small and secretive. "Grandpa, why did you leave so fast last night?" I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups don't always get along. But I'll always come back when I can." "Promise?" she asked. My throat tightened. "Promise." After we hung up, I sat in the stillness of my kitchen and realized something. Melissa might have power inside that house, but she didn't own the bond I had with my grandchildren. She couldn't erase the years of love I had poured into Daniel, nor the truth of what I had given up for them. But if I stayed silent much longer, she just might succeed in rewriting the story, turning me into a shadow, a burden, a man who had outlived his usefulness. For the first time since signing away my company, I felt a flicker of resolve. I had been willing to sacrifice everything for my son, but I would not let my dignity, my very place in this family, be sold off too. The question was no longer whether I belonged. It was how long I could keep pretending that love meant accepting exile. The invitation came in the form of a hesitant phone call from Daniel. "Dad, it's Emma's birthday next week. She wants you there," she asked specifically. For a moment, warmth rushed into my chest. Emma had always been my little shadow, following me in the garden, scribbling drawings for my fridge. Missing her birthday was unthinkable. "I'll be there," I said without hesitation. But I also knew what that meant, facing Melissa again. When the day came, I wrapped Emma's gift in simple paper, a hand-bound sketchbook, and a box of colored pencils. She loved to draw, and I wanted her to have something that belonged only to her. Something lasting. The house buzzed with guests. When I arrived, neighbors, school friends, Daniel's co-workers. Laughter floated through the air and balloons bobbed above the tables. For a brief moment, as Emma ran to me and wrapped her arms around my waist, I felt like I had stepped into sunlight again. "You came?" She squealed, her smile brighter than all the candles on her cake. I kissed the top of her head. Of course I did. Nothing could keep me away. But the warmth cooled the instant Melissa appeared across the room. She smiled for the sake of the crowd, but her eyes, sharp cold, told the real story. As the party went on, I kept to the background, chatting with a few familiar faces, watching the children play. I didn't want to stir conflict on Emma's special day, but Melissa made sure I couldn't simply fade into the corner. During the cake cutting, she raised her glass for a toast. "To our daughter Emma," she began sweetly. "May she grow up surrounded by love, stability, and the kind of success we've built for her." Her gaze drifted to me, lingering a second too long. "Because it's not enough to give things up for your family. What matters is creating something they can actually be proud of." A hush fell, the kind of silence that says everyone understood what she really meant. I felt dozens of eyes flick toward me. Emma looked up, confused, her hands still clutching mine. "Mom, Grandpa did give us something." Melissa's lips tightened, but before she could respond, I gently squeezed Emma's shoulder. "It's all right, sweetheart." But it wasn't all right. Not anymore. I looked around the room at Daniel, who shifted uncomfortably, at the guests who avoided my eyes, at Melissa, who wore triumph behind her painted smile. And I realized something important. If I let this moment pass in silence, Melissa's story would become the story. That I was a weak man, a failed man, someone to be pitied rather than respected. For the first time, I felt the fire inside me push against the walls I'd built to contain it. The party went on, laughter resuming, but in my heart I knew something had changed. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Emma, Tommy, even Daniel, about whether they would grow up knowing the truth of love and sacrifice, or a version rewritten by contempt. I didn't speak that night. Not yet. But I left with one certainty burning in me: the next time Melissa tried to erase me, I would not stay silent. It didn't take long for Melissa to push me past the line I had promised myself not to cross. A week after Emma's birthday, Daniel invited me for dinner. He said it quietly over the phone, almost apologetic, but I could hear the hope in his voice. Maybe he wanted to bridge the distance to remind his wife that family could mean more than pride and appearances. When I arrived, the table was set, candles flickering, roast chicken steaming on a platter. Emma and Tommy rushed to greet me, their joy untarnished by the tension humming in the air. For a brief, fragile moment, I thought maybe things could be different, but Melissa had other plans. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down and folded her hands, her gaze locked on me like a hunter cornering prey. "Max," she began smoothly, "we need to talk about boundaries. It's not healthy for the children to see you around so much. They're beginning to think of you as more than just a visitor." Daniel shifted in his chair. "Melissa," he warned gently, but she didn't stop. "You've done enough. You sold your company, you made your gesture, and we appreciate it, of course." Her tone dripped with insincerity. "But clinging to this family like a lifeline, it's not fair to us. Or to you." Her words hit me like stones. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to step in to say something, anything. But he stayed silent, staring down at his plate. Something in me snapped. I set my fork down carefully, my voice low but firm. "Melissa, do you even understand what I gave up? That company wasn't just a job. It was 20 years of my life. Every late night, every sacrifice, every dollar saved, all of it was for my family. For Daniel. For the home you live in now." Her eyes narrowed. "We never asked you to do that." I leaned forward, my gaze steady. "No, you didn't. That's what makes it a sacrifice. A father doesn't wait to be asked. He sees his child drowning and throws himself into the water no matter the cost." The room went silent, except for the clink of Emma's spoon against her bowl. Her wide eyes darted between us, her young mind piecing together more than we thought she could. Melissa's lips tightened, but I didn't let her speak. "You can call me poor, you can dismiss me as a failure, but don't you dare erase what I've done for my son. Don't you dare teach my grandchildren that love means convenience or that worth is measured in money alone." Daniel finally looked up, his face pale, torn. "Dad," he whispered, but his voice trailed off. For the first time in years, I felt my chest expand with something I had nearly forgotten: strength. My words were not just defense, they were truth long buried, finally spoken aloud. Melissa pushed back her chair, her face flushed with anger. "This is exactly why you don't belong here," she hissed. I stood slowly, steady as stone. If telling the truth means I don't belong, then maybe this house isn't what I thought it was. I walked toward the door, the children calling after me. Behind me, Daniel's voice trembled, caught between his wife and his father. But deep inside, as I stepped into the night air, I knew something had shifted forever. I was no longer the silent man in the corner. I was a father reclaiming his voice. The night I walked out of Daniel's house, I thought the weight of silence would crush me. For years, I had swallowed my pride, convincing myself that endurance was the noblest form of love. But that dinner, that humiliation, it cracked something open inside me. And once it cracked, the truth poured out. I woke the next morning with a strange sense of calm. My little apartment felt bare, but it was mine, a place untouched by judgment or resentment. As the sun filtered through the blinds, I sat with a cup of black coffee and asked myself the question I hadn't dared in years. Who am I without the company, without the role of rescuer? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew this. I wasn't finished. I began with small steps. I dusted off the old notebooks, where I'd once scribbled ideas for new venture side projects I'd put away because the company consumed me. I walked to the library, checked out books on entrepreneurship, even sat in on a local seminar about small business reinvention. At first, it felt almost foolish. I was in my 60s. Wasn't I supposed to fade into the background? But as I listened to younger men talk about their dreams, I realized something important. Wisdom is a currency too. And unlike money, it doesn't run out. Neighbors began stopping by my apartment when they saw me working late into the evening. One, a single mother named Claire, asked if I could advise her on starting a small bakery. Another, a young veteran, needed help with budgeting his disability checks to launch a repair shop. I found myself offering guidance, sharing hard-earned lessons, and for the first time in a long while, people looked at me not with pity, but with respect. Meanwhile, Daniel called less and less. Melissa made sure of it, no doubt. But Emma snuck in phone calls, her little voice whispering into the receiver, "Grandpa, I drew the picture you told me to. I'm keeping it safe for you." Each time my heart swelled. It reminded me why I was rebuilding, not to prove Melissa wrong, but to show my grandchildren, and maybe even my son, that love and sacrifice don't make you weak. They make you strong enough to rise again. Weeks turned into months, and I was no longer just Max the father who sold his company. I was Max the mentor, the builder, the man who refused to stay down. But deep inside, I knew the real confrontation was still waiting. Sooner or later, Melissa and the rest of the family would see that I had found my footing again. And when that moment came, I would no longer be standing in their shadow. I would be standing tall. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Daniel showed up at my apartment. I hadn't expected him, truth be told. I thought Melissa had buried any chance of him visiting. But there he was, standing in the doorway, shifting uncomfortably like a boy who had done something wrong. "Dad," he said, glancing around my modest place. "You've been busy." I gestured to the scattered notebooks, the laptop open with spreadsheets, the stack of flyers from local businesses I'd been advising. "Keeps me out of trouble," I replied with a small smile. Daniel walked slowly around the room, his eyes lingering on the plans I had pinned to the wall. "I didn't know you were doing all this." "Why would you?" I said gently. "You've had your own battles to fight." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought after selling the company you'd just fade out. Retire. But he stopped searching for the right word. "You're alive again." Those words struck deeper than he realized. Alive. That was exactly what it felt like. I poured him some coffee and we sat across from each other, the silence between us, not hostile for once, but heavy with possibility. "Dad," he said finally, "I don't say this enough, but thank you for what you did. I know Melissa doesn't." He cut himself short, as if even here he wasn't free from her shadow. "You don't have to explain, Daniel," I told him. "I did what I did because I'm your father. That will never change." He looked at me, guilt written all over his face. "I should have stood up for you more." For a moment I saw the little boy who used to follow me around the shop, eyes wide with admiration. And I realized that somewhere along the way, life had made him forget that feeling. But Melissa hadn't forgotten. She noticed his visits, his softened tone when he spoke of me. And she didn't like it. One evening, Daniel admitted as much. "Melissa says you're manipulating me, that you're trying to wedge yourself back into our lives." I laughed softly, not with humor, but with disbelief. "Manipulate, Daniel? I'm just living my life." "If that threatens her, maybe she should ask herself why." He lowered his eyes, torn. "She thinks if you keep coming around, the kids will look up to you more than us." That broke something in me. Not from pain, but from clarity. Melissa wasn't afraid of me being a burden. She was afraid of me being an example. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Daniel, children don't choose who to love more. They love whoever shows up, whoever tells them the truth. If that scares Melissa, it's not because of me, it's because she knows deep down she's failing them in ways money can't cover. Daniel didn't answer, but the silence told me everything. The cracks were showing not just in my relationship with them, but in theirs with each other. Melissa could try to push me out all she wanted, but the more I stood tall, the more Daniel began to remember the father who had once taught him what it meant to be a man, and that I realized was the kind of power she couldn't control forever. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner. Daniel had called earlier that week, his voice hopeful. "Dad, why don't you come by? The kids miss you." I hesitated, but Emma's eager voice in the background, "Grandpa, please," was enough to sway me. When I arrived, I carried a small apple pie from a bakery down the street. Emma darted to the door and hugged me tight as though she feared I might disappear again. Jacob followed, grinning ear to ear. For a moment I felt whole again. But the warmth ended when Melissa entered the room. She wore that practiced smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Her gaze dropped to the pie in my hands. "Store-bought," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "Well, at least it's something." Daniel shot her a look, but stayed silent. I placed the pie on the counter, choosing not to take the bait. "It's Emma's favorite," I said softly. Dinner started quietly. The kids chattered about school and friends, and Daniel tried to keep conversation light. I answered their questions, laughed where I could. But I felt Melissa watching me like a hawk waiting for her moment. It came halfway through the meal. "Daniel," she said, suddenly setting down her fork with a clink, "we need to stop this." The table stilled. "Stop?" What? Daniel asked cautiously. "This," she snapped, gesturing toward me, inviting him back like nothing happened. "You think I forgot he sold his company, handed it away, and for what now he parades around like some wise old hero? And you let the kids worship him as if he's their savior." Emma's eyes widened. Jacob froze. Even Daniel looked stunned at her bluntness. I set my fork down, my voice calm but firm. "Melissa, I didn't come here to be a hero. I came here to be a father. A grandfather." Her laugh was cold. "A father fathers provide. Fathers protect. You gave away the only thing that proved your worth. Now all you have left are stories and advice nobody asked for." Emma burst out, her little voice trembling. "That's not true. Grandpa helps. He helps me draw. And he tells me stories. And he cares." Melissa's face flushed. "Emma, that's enough." But Daniel spoke this time, his tone sharper than I'd heard in years. "Melissa, don't talk to him like that. He did provide. More than you'll ever admit." The air went heavy, the kind of silence that comes when years of unspoken truths finally hit the table. I looked at Melissa, not with anger, but with something deeper, pity. "You think worth is measured in houses and titles? But one day you'll realize children remember the man who showed up, not the bank account that paid the bills." Her lips tightened, but she didn't respond. The battle wasn't over. I could see it in her eyes. But for the first time, she wasn't in complete control. And for the first time, Daniel had chosen to stand on my side. The dinner had ended in a fragile silence. Daniel drove me back that night, both of us lost in thought. He kept his hands tight on the wheel, eyes forward. I didn't press him. The words had been said. The truth was out. But I knew Melissa wasn't done. 2 days later, I found out just how far she was willing to go. I was in the middle of organizing my notes when my phone buzzed. Daniel's name lit up the screen. His voice was strained, hushed, like he was hiding in another room. "Dad, Melissa doesn't want you coming around anymore." I closed my eyes, the weight of those words pressing down like a stone. "What do you mean, son?" He hesitated. "She said last night that if I keep inviting you over, she'll take the kids and go to her mother's. She thinks you're undermining her." The silence stretched. My chest tightened. "So she gave you an ultimatum?" I said quietly. Daniel's voice cracked. Yeah. She said it's either her way," or his words trailed off, but I understood. I didn't get angry. Not outwardly, but inside it burned the thought of my grandchildren being used as pawns in this battle. I pictured Emma's small arms around me, Jacob's laughter when I helped him with his toy car. And now Melissa wanted to rip that away just to prove a point. "Daniel, I said, my voice calm but heavy with conviction. I won't put you in the middle. But know this love doesn't vanish because someone demands it. You can't erase me from their lives like a number off a balance sheet. He said nothing, only breathed heavily on the other end. I could hear the war inside him, his loyalty torn between the woman he promised his life to and the father who had given up everything for him. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the photos on my shelf. Emma on my shoulders at the fair. Jacob with frosting on his nose at his 5th birthday. Memories Melissa couldn't rewrite. But the fear gnawed at me. What if she followed through? What if she poisoned their hearts against me before they were old enough to know the truth? I poured myself a glass of water, hands trembling slightly, and whispered to the empty room, if she wants a fight, she'll have one. But it won't be with anger. It'll be with truth. And truth always outlasts lies. For the first time, I knew the war for my family had truly begun. The first sign came in the smallest way. Emma used to call me every few days, her sweet voice tumbling with excitement about school projects and drawings. Then the calls stopped. At first, I told myself she was busy, that kids lose track of time. But when a whole week passed, I knew. Melissa had made her move. I tried calling Daniel's house. Once. Twice. Each time, no answer. Finally, one afternoon, a voice answered. But it wasn't Daniel. It was Melissa. Max, she said, her tone ice cold. You need to stop. No more calls. No more visits. The children are confused enough as it is. Confused, I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. They're not confused. They love their grandfather. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Love children love whoever fills their heads with pretty stories. But I'm raising them to respect strength. And frankly, you're not part of that picture anymore. Her words stung sharper than I expected. But before I could respond, the line went dead. That night, the apartment felt emptier than ever. Silence pressed against the walls. For the first time, I wondered if I was truly losing them, if Melissa's voice would drown out mine in their young hearts. But then, I looked at the photo frame on my desk. Daniel, barely 20, wearing his college cap and gown. The smile on his face, the tears in my eyes as I stood in the crowd. He'd only made it there because I'd sold the last of my land. Because I'd chosen him over myself. Melissa wanted to erase that truth. She wanted to rewrite the story so that I was nothing but a burden. But I had lived too long to let a lie define me. So I made a decision. The next Sunday, I went to the family gathering at my sister's house. Everyone was there, cousins, uncles, aunts. Daniel and Melissa too, though Melissa stiffened when she saw me walk through the door. I ignored her glare. When the meal began, I stood up, clearing my throat. My voice shook at first, but then grew steadier with each word. I need to say something. I began, my eyes sweeping the table. For years, I've carried a story in silence. Many of you don't know what I gave up to see my son succeed. I sold my company, the one I built with 2 decades of sweat, to make sure Daniel had a home, a chance of future. I don't regret it. I never will. But lately it seems sacrifice is easily forgotten. The room was still. Daniel's fork froze midway. Melissa's face flushed her jaw tight. I don't say this for sympathy, I continued. I say it because children deserve to know where they come from. They deserve to know that love is not measured in bank accounts, but in choices, sometimes the hardest ones a father can make. Gasps whispered around the table. A few relatives glanced at Melissa, then back at me. I saw the unease spread. The lie she had built was cracking. For the first time, Melissa wasn't in control of the narrative. And for the first time, I saw something flicker in Daniel's eyes, not just guilt, but recognition. The tide was turning. The room stayed frozen for what felt like forever. The clinking of silverware stopped. The only sound was the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. Melissa was the first to break the silence. How dare you? She hissed, her face red with fury. You think standing here and spouting half-truths makes you noble? You sold your company because you couldn't handle it anymore. Don't act like it was some grand sacrifice. Gasps rippled around the table. My sister shook her head slightly, my brother-in-law muttered under his breath, and all eyes shifted between us like spectators at a match they hadn't expected to see. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I placed my palms flat on the table. Melissa, you can twist my motives however you want, but the paperwork says otherwise. I sold a thriving business, one I could have lived off comfortably until the end of my days because your family was about to lose everything. You don't have to thank me, but you will not erase the truth. Daniel finally spoke, his voice strained. Melissa, Dad's right. You know he's right. Her head snapped toward him. You're taking his side. I'm not taking sides, Daniel stammered, though his tone betrayed him. I remember those nights, Melissa. The debt notices the fear. He's the reason we're standing here in this house. The reason the kids sleep without worrying, they'll wake up on the street. Melissa's chair screeched against the floor as she stood abruptly. Her eyes glistened with rage. You weak men are all the same, hiding behind excuses, making sacrifices that nobody asked for, then demanding worship for it. She jabbed a finger at me. You're not a savior, Max. You're a parasite. And if Daniel can't see that, then maybe he's not the man I thought he was. A heavy silence fell. Her words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating. Daniel's shoulders slumped. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Around the table, relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Some sympathetic, others horrified. I took a breath, steady and deliberate. Melissa, I said softly, you can call me anything you want. But don't you dare teach my grandchildren that love and sacrifice are worthless. Because one day they'll see through this. And when they do, they'll remember who stood by them. Melissa's hands trembled. For the first time I saw her mask crack, fear flashing beneath the anger. She stormed out of the room, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. The slam of the front door echoed through the house. Daniel sat in silence, staring at the table. His hands clenched, unclenched, then finally covered his face. Dad, what have we done? He whispered. And in that moment I knew the war was no longer just between me and Melissa. It had carved itself into Daniel's marriage, his home, his future. The masks had fallen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The room stayed frozen for what felt like forever. The clinking of silverware stopped. The only sound was the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. Melissa was the first to break the silence. How dare you? She hissed, her face red with fury. You think standing here and spouting half-truths makes you noble? You sold your company because you couldn't handle it anymore? Don't act like it was some grand sacrifice. Gasps rippled around the table. My sister shook her head slightly. My brother-in-law muttered under his breath, and all eyes shifted between us like spectators at a match they hadn't expected to see. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I placed my palms flat on the table. Melissa, you can twist my motives however you want, but the paperwork says otherwise. I sold a thriving business, one I could have lived off comfortably until the end of my days because your family was about to lose everything. You don't have to thank me. But you will not erase the truth. Daniel finally spoke, his voice strained. Melissa, Dad's right. You know he's right. Her head snapped toward him. You're taking his side. I'm not taking sides, Daniel stammered, though his tone betrayed him. I remember those nights, Melissa. The debt notices the fear. He's the reason we're standing here in this house. The reason the kids sleep without worrying they'll wake up on the street. Melissa's chair screeched against the floor as she stood abruptly. Her eyes glistened with rage. You weak men are all the same, hiding behind excuses, making sacrifices that nobody asked for, then demanding worship for it. She jabbed a finger at me. You're not a savior, Max. You're a parasite. And if Daniel can't see that, then maybe he's not the man I thought he was. A heavy silence fell. Her words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating. Daniel's shoulders slumped. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Around the table, relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Some sympathetic, others horrified. I took a breath, steady and deliberate. Melissa, I said softly, you can call me anything you want. But don't you dare teach my grandchildren that love and sacrifice are worthless. Because one day they'll see through this. And when they do, they'll remember who stood by them. Melissa's hands trembled. For the first time, I saw her mask crack, fear flashing beneath the anger. She stormed out of the room, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. The slam of the front door echoed through the house. Daniel sat in silence, staring at the table. His hands clenched, unclenched, then finally covered his face. "Dad, what have we done?" he whispered. And in that moment, I knew the war was no longer just between me and Melissa. It had carved itself into Daniel's marriage, his home, his future. The masks had fallen, and nothing would ever be the same again.